Good afternoon and welcome to this presentation. We're sorry that we're not with you in Atlanta for NCSM's annual conference, but safety is smart and we're good with that. We're really excited to share with you today the strength of partnerships, design and implementation of equity-oriented, cohesive, evidence-based mathematical professional learning models. My name is Laura Kastner. I'll introduce the rest of the team in just a minute, but we're really glad and thankful for your time. Thanks for tuning in. So the staff from our Student Success and Math Partnership from REL Appalachia are the following ladies on the screen. You'll hear from 3 of us today in this presentation, and one of our other staff members, Ryoko Yamaguchi, will be presenting also during NCSM, so you can get a recorded session from her entitled Algebra 1 and College Preparatory Diploma Outcomes Among Virginia Students. Again, work that also stemmed from this partnership, and we would love for you to check that out as well. So REL Appalachia is one of 10 regional education laboratories that are funded by the Institute of Education Sciences. We regionally serve these 4 states here in green, so Kentucky, Tennessee, West Virginia, and Virginia, and we work together in partnership with all of the other RELs with the goal of supporting a more evidence-based education system. And the activities that we do within the REL, or all the RELs do, are fall into 3 main buckets. One is applied research, training, coaching, and technical support. And the third is dissemination of best practices. This presentation showcases work that was done in the second bucket, this training, coaching, and technical support umbrella. And to give you a little bit more of an idea about the diversity of projects in our region, this map shows you some of the partnerships that took place with our stakeholders in the region, and specifically the Student Success and Mathematics Partnership here in Central Virginia has been the testing ground for a lot of this work. There's more information on our website about all of these partnerships, as well as blogs, infographics, and lots of other resources related to these different partnerships and work. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Pam.
Thank you so much, Laura. The primary focus of our presentation today has to do with professional learning models. And we'll start with the foundation of those models, what's necessary, and then dig into the components. As you can see on this slide, in the upper right-hand corner is a short URL, bit.ly/PLM handouts. If you go to that location, you will see 5 handouts that we'll be referring to throughout the presentation, and we will remind you of this. Feel free to pause the presentation to write this down or to go get the handouts, and then we can get started. Thanks. So the overarching session goal is to increase your awareness of resources to support the design and implementation of a coherent professional learning model. The objectives for this session are that you will be able to form partnerships to improve mathematics teaching and learning, design, implement, and evaluate cohesive professional learning models, find evidence-based resources that the REL Appalachia, REL App, and the What Works Clearinghouse websites. The work that we're going to highlight today comes from the Student Success in Mathematics Partnership, as Laura pointed out earlier. It is really critical that we come together to engage around research and practice, where we not only bring what's known from research, but also really embrace the deep knowledge of practice that you bring as practitioners. We know that relationships are the heart of effective partnerships, and to be successful over the long term, we need an intentional focus to bring trust and respect together to do this work. We were very fortunate to work with multiple school divisions in North Central Virginia, and we have spent a number of years digging in and working in this relationship. In the early days of our partnership, we began by identifying what was the problem of practice that we wanted to engage about, and how are we going to bring research and practice together to make change. What was identified across the partnership districts was that not all students had the depth of skills, knowledge, and understanding needed for success in algebra and higher level mathematics courses. In particular, when you looked at different groups of students, there were gaps in readiness for students who are English learners, students of color, students with disabilities, and those students who came from economically disadvantaged homes. So in that context, the partners from the district said, what can we do? How can we bring research to bear and our knowledge of our schools and our students to make the change happen? So we dug into that. Then we set the goal. So at the end of this partnership work and going forward, we want to ensure that all students master those key skills, practices, and understandings of critical concepts of algebra by grade 9 and be able to take higher level mathematics in high school. You'll notice that it's not just content, but it's also those practices. Our partners identified that we want students to really be able to communicate mathematically, to solve problems and do the other things that are engaged in the mathematical practices, not just be understanding of particular mathematical procedures. And that was core to how we identified the work. So we had to step back and look at the big picture. In our work together, we identified that there would be steps in order to get to that goal or outcome that we had established. So we looked at what were the inputs, what do we already know about staffing, time available to do this work, materials, and so on. Then we broke it down into what are those things that are needed in order to be successful in mathematics. We need to make sure that the curricula is there, that there's opportunities for common planning time, that we have professional development focused on mathematics teaching and learning that's grounded in the research. So as you can see here, there's a dotted line around the center part of this logic model. That's where we spent a lot of our work together over the course of the last 4.5 years. Specifically, we wanted to make sure that those short-term, long-term, and impact outcomes were available by the time we finished our work together. So as you might imagine, we had to dig into the professional learning, the features that made it deep and good. So what do we know about designing professional learning? What are some essential features of effective professional learning from your perspective and your experience? I'm going to take a moment now to suggest that you pause the video and just write down, jot down an idea or two about essential features of effective professional learning. Thank you for taking the time to reflect. I'm going to call in a couple of people, my colleagues here. So I'm going to start with Jill. If you were identifying some essential features for effective professional learning, what would be something that you would include in that?
I think it's most productive when teachers have the opportunities to work together, when they can collaborate during the professional development to support their own learning of the content, as well as build understandings together that they can relate to their own contexts. When they work together in professional development, sometimes they also can learn more about how to facilitate those same sort of conversations in their classroom. That's great.
Laura, what about you? What did you reflect on?
Sure. As I think back to my days in the classroom, I think about professional development that had follow through of some sort, that it wasn't a one and done, that there was some kind of a sustained element to it where it would be, we'd circle back and talk about it again. And also to the idea that it would relate to my work, that it wouldn't be something completely separate and theoretical, but that it would be practical and connected to the work that I was doing the very next day.
Those are excellent features. In fact, if we look at the next slide, we know from research that effective teacher professional development has these different attributes. In fact, it impacts positively student achievement when it focuses on specific content, incorporates active learning, supports collaboration, like Jill pointed out, uses models of effective practice. What do we already know is working? How does that change practice? Provides coaching and expert support, offers feedback and reflection, is of sustained duration, and is job embedded. In fact, the examples that Laura gave was that it continues after that activity. Maybe you meet and you gain some experience, but then you revisit and revisit over time. And the idea that you're taking it into the classroom in the work that you do, it's job embedded. So thanks for those. And I think it's really helpful for you to take a moment and think for yourself, which of these your idea that you jotted down aligns with, or is it something else that is not here? So we talked about professional development generally. Let's focus in on effective mathematics teaching practices. So what are those from your experience and your leadership role as a math learning leader? What research-based high leverage practices, mathematics teaching practices, are needed to promote deep learning of mathematics in your local school or district? Again, take a moment to pause the recording and jot down an idea or two. Okay, let's look at what do we know? What does the research say? We know that based on the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, that the mathematics teaching practices include establishing mathematics goals to focus the learning, implement tasks that promote reasoning and problem solving, use and connect mathematical representations, facilitate meaningful mathematical discourse, pose purposeful questions, build procedural fluency from conceptual understanding, support productive struggle in learning of mathematics, and elicit evidence of student thinking. So how do we build professional development in mathematics, learning and teaching that really makes a difference? We take what's known from research about effective professional development strategies and overlap that with effective mathematics teaching practices. What are those professional learning opportunities where we take some of the aspects of effective teaching of mathematics and combine them with a strategy that we know works? I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jill, to talk about those critical professional learning components. Jill?
Thanks, Pam. So where Pam linked those two circles together and showed that Venn diagram of that intersection, she also emphasized earlier all these other components of mathematics teacher learning environments, the teachers involved, the school environment. So there's lots of pieces here. So we discussed this idea of a professional learning model, where it is a cohesive system of professional development in which educator learning opportunities relate to each other and contribute to the same longer-term set of goals and vision for mathematics teaching and learning. Thereby taking all these disparate pieces and thinking, how can we bring these ideas together? So then, as Laura mentioned, the teacher professional development is connected and sustained. And then teachers see this as a cohesive set of opportunities that are moving them towards a goal. To that end, planning for effective professional development must include alignment of the professional development to a common vision and a district level goal. We must connect to standards and practices for mathematics teaching and learning, consider student data and learning needs, and take the school and district context into consideration. To do these things together, we came up with a little plan. So there's these 5 steps here, thinking first about defining a professional learning goal, attending to your context and student learning data. These different steps here are, you're going to follow a process of beginning here and then going through these next steps, maybe revising your other goals along the way. But this overarching professional learning goal and being situated in context is critical. After you've defined this professional learning goal, you then set teacher learning and practice goals. What are the goals for teachers in their classrooms, and what do we want teachers to learn before that? Then, what are the professional learning opportunities? How are we going to set up teachers for that learning? Then we need to implement the teacher professional development and then assess teacher learning. That assessment of teacher learning needs to be specific to the professional development activities. And it can be small and targeted in scope and can be used to shape the design of subsequent professional learning activities, thereby going around the circle again. Now, thinking about building capacity and supporting student achievement with this PLM, we need to acknowledge and act on the contextual factors within the professional learning culture. These professional learning activities don't operate in a vacuum. We need to consider what needs to happen to make this sustainable. How much time do teachers have for professional learning? What is teachers' content knowledge and their pedagogical content knowledge? We need to make sure we're attending to issues of equity and access. Are all students and teachers getting served? And we need to build a professional learning culture where this sort of learning and changing and even assessing teacher learning along the way are built into this process. Together, this can build teacher capacity as well as capacity around professional learning. So to explain this idea of the PLM planning process, we created a scenario here where there's a district that wants to increase mathematics problem solving across grades K through 12, and they plan to start in middle school, grades 6 through 8, where they see students beginning to struggle with complex problems, particularly those involving fractions. The teachers recognize the problem, but they do not have concrete strategies to apply. The teachers are relatively tech savvy, and there's a district mathematics coach who's available to support the PD efforts. So this example may not be exactly what your district or school division has, but using this example is going to help us dig into those different elements as well as prompt us to consider the contextual factors, the teacher learning opportunities, as well as specific mathematics teaching practices. So here's this professional learning model, those 5 steps pulled apart into this template. This template is one of the handouts on that bit.ly link there under bit.ly PLM handouts. It's the one that says it's the PLM template. So first, when you're looking at this template, you'll see there's space at the top for defining a mathematics professional learning goal, attending to your context and student learning data. In the example we just discussed, it was how the district is looking to increase problem solving in grades K through 12, and specifically focusing in on middle grades and those students at that time. We're assuming they're using some student data to say that this is where they're seeing students struggling. And so that goal gets listed there. In that next step, we're going to consider the how we're going to move on to teacher learning and practice goals, as well as going on to the next steps. We're on the next page. Before we go into that, we're going to discuss the contextual factors. So as we discuss if there's that learning goal and the student learning needs, we also need to consider what are the other contextual factors influencing professional development. Earlier in that logic model diagram, Pam laid out things about the school environment as well as teacher knowledge. Those are 2 elements of the contextual factors that are here. On this handout, you'll see there's 4 categories: teachers, materials and instruction, school culture and logistics, and professional learning. This handout then also provides opportunities for you to consider these questions and these areas and specific questions under them. What we consider here first is when in that example we gave, some of the context is about the teachers feeling pretty tech savvy. So because of that, that can lead to different sort of teacher learning opportunities than in a school where the teachers weren't feeling tech savvy. That scenario also mentioned that the teachers were aware of this problem, but didn't feel they had strategies. So in some ways that emphasizes that they kind of know what the problem is, and they maybe have a readiness to take on new strategies, and that also may not be prevalent everywhere. What we don't know yet is about the school culture or the scheduling. Do teachers have time for professional learning? We don't know. And also professional learning opportunities in this case include a coach, which is also unique or maybe something other places. What we want you to do now is consider which of these factors do you need to consider as you're designing professional development or the whole professional learning model template. Which factors do you need to dig into? We'll give you a minute to look at the handout itself, as well as consider these different areas. Okay, and now we can dig back into our template. And we can now set our teacher learning and practice goals. Now, these teacher learning and practice goals are where you're going to consider what are the mathematics instructional strategies or those effective practices, which is again one of those other handouts on that link that you want to see in the classroom and that we then maybe need to prepare teachers to be ready to implement. In this case, when we're talking about teachers and problem solving in middle grades and teachers' readiness for strategies, things like using visual representations may be something, encouraging more mathematical discourse may be another one, as well as problem solving tasks. Teachers may need more access to tasks. Those are 3 different options for goals. It may be in this one that we want to make sure that teachers consider different type of task types. In middle grades, many times there becomes an exemplar of a task type, but maybe we need to consider different types of tasks. Maybe, for example, different types of percent change tasks or different types of visuals. So teachers develop this flexibility as well as comfort with areas. So in this time here on the template, you'd complete this left-hand column here on the bottom, left-hand row, about what are the teacher learning goals and practice goals that you want to see teachers take on. And then the next stop is going to be thinking about what are those teacher professional learning opportunities you would do to those. So we're going to connect those. But before we move to that, if you go to our next slide, we have to make sure they're always considering access and equity. That was one of these goals we talked about at the beginning, as well as something that the teachers and leaders we worked with were very clear. When they're trying to seek to change instructional practice, they're thinking about each and every student. And we want to make sure we do that as well. So this principle guides what you're thinking about those teacher learning goals and practice goals. An excellent mathematics program requires that all students have access to a high quality mathematics curriculum, effective teaching and learning, high expectations, and the support and resources needed to maximize their potential. And therefore, when we're thinking about those teacher learning and practice goals, and when we're working with teachers, we want to continually mention that this is for each and every student. In what ways are we making sure that these high quality practices that actually may be complex and new to students as well are consistently brought into the classroom? So the next handout is the selected strategies for professional learning. This is going to come into your PLM next. Now that you've decided what your goals are, how are we going to get there? What strategies are you going to use in professional learning? And you'll see in that template, there's more than one spot. Because if your division-wide goal is something about middle grades problem solving, you can't just use one strategy. You may need a multifaceted approach. So the strategies listed here, you can see the first one is examining student work. Then they list demonstration lessons. Another strategy is coaching or workshops. In this example, we may want to say teachers may need a workshop where they're going to work together on some mathematics tasks. We may want to have opportunities for coaching. We then may want to have study groups where teachers look back at student work and say, what did we notice that students were using and how are they taking on these strategies or engaging in these complex problems? So these different strategies listed here are going to go into your PLM and you're going to decide which of these are you going to use in order to help teachers reach those learning and practice goals. I'd like you, I was going to say, you can look at those strategies and say, which of these do you think that you want to look at for your own teachers or to this scenario? And as you look at these strategies, you'll notice there's sub-bullets that help to define them. So you can really think of which of these and the details are going to align with the thing I'm trying to do next with the teachers I work with. And then, yes, Pam, I pass it back to you. Thank you, Laura, as we try to think about the research related to these approaches and what can be built into the PLM.
Thanks, Jill. That was really great. So how might we do that? Where do we begin? We actually have the advantage of having access to resources. When I say we, it's all of you. There are what we call What Works Clearinghouse practice guides. They are across domains. We have identified here 6 that specifically focus in on mathematics. You'll see here their practice guides dealing with teaching mathematics to young children, developing effective fractions instruction for kindergarten through grade 8, improving mathematical problem solving in 4 through 8, encouraging girls in math and science, teaching strategies for algebra knowledge in middle and high school students, assisting students struggling in mathematics, intervention and elementary grades. That was just released in the spring of 2021. So given our goal here to increase problem solving in the district, and in particular at middle grades level, there are a couple of practice guides that seem to be of use. One could be around developing effective fraction instruction. That's a great practice guide to look at. Or we could look at the one specifically for problem solving. For the sake of digging in a little bit, we're going to look at the Improving Mathematical Problem Solving practice guide. Each of these practice guides have multiple recommendations. I'm sorry, Laura, could you flip over to our slide for one more minute? Next slide. Okay, I just was going to point out that, in fact, there are 5 recommendations in this particular practice guide. Each of the practice guides set up a set of recommendations and then are really clear about the instructional tips that can be associated with those recommendations to make those available to you. And you'll see also on the slide that we have additional resources available on those on the website there. Thank you very much, Laura. So let's actually go look at the Improving Mathematical Problem Solving practice guide. You can see here in this example that we can do a number of things. Recommendations could include the preparing the problems and so on. We can look at additional problem solving, additional recommendations, including really digging into rational number topics. Very good. Let's return over to our slide. Given the context, both the need to focus on problem solving, the fact that kids in this sample district and our sample problem, they are having difficulties with rational numbers, which is very typical for the junction between upper elementary and middle school, where students have a part to whole or an area model conception of what fractions are. When they transition into middle grades, oftentimes they have to start thinking about the number as a place on the number line. To help bridge that gap and align with the recommendations in the practice guide, we have gone to a particular set of open source tools that would be available to you and anyone else as a way to start to think about remediating and addressing those types of problems. So you can see here, Laura, could you change the denominator in this fraction just to see what happens in this applet? If you stop for 1 second here, here is an example as Laura slid the slider on this particular app, the students can start to see that when the numerator stays the same and that number at the bottom, the denominator is increasing, that in fact, the size of the slice and the part to whole representation is getting smaller, and the place and location on the number line is actually getting closer and closer to 0. If the blue slider there that Laura's grabbing hold of, if she goes closer and closer to 1 on the bottom or making that number smaller, you'll see that it's getting closer and closer to 1. So when we get to 2 halves, for example, you see that you have a whole and you're at the location of 1 in the number line. So tools like this help students to bridge their conceptions that might be a part to whole or an area model to a linear model. And in fact, if you click the set models box there, Laura, you can see that it also can represent for students, what does it mean to have 2/4 or 1/2 of those representations? So the different tools here. Thanks so much. We can return to the presentation. So here's where we're going to recommend you pause the recording again when I'm done describing this, but think about, take that URL, go to the practice guide, specifically the problem solving practice guide, and choose one of those recommendations. In the practice guide, it lists specific examples of how this might apply in practice. How would you design professional learning to enact that recommendation? What are the professional learning strategy or strategies that you're going to use there? Would you use a professional learning community? Would you have the coach work directly with teachers? Would you co-teacher model? What grades would you target? Would you start with the whole grade span at middle level, 6 through 8, or would you focus in on one grade at a time? What are the current contextual considerations and what technology, tools, or supports could be used? Given the scenario here, if you were working with these teachers, they're very tech savvy, maybe you would use tools like GeoGebra applets to help students understand and connect to those rational number topics. If you were in your own district and you didn't have tech savvy teachers, you might use a different approach. What data would you collect to determine if the professional learning was successful? How would you collect that data? So you could pause, fill out the table, think about these things using the example or your example. Thanks. So where are we now in the template? As Jill pointed out to you, we begin with a goal. We have the vision goal in mind, the district goal in mind, and we also have the specific content in mind. We focus in on what are those guiding principles from NCTM that I'm going to focus on. What are the particular mathematics teaching practices? What am I going to do? I've chosen those strategies. I've planned it. Then the final 2 steps in that cycle that Jill pointed out at the beginning is to implement the teacher professional development in whatever form that it takes. And then we're going to assess teacher learning. One of the things that we know is that professional learning that increases educator effectiveness and results for all students, you need to use a variety of sources and types of student, educator, and system-wide data to help plan that, to assess its effectiveness, and to evaluate professional learning. We have included within the set of handouts for you a tool. It's the 5th handout in that list, and this actually outlines for you 5 levels of assessment based on Thomas Gutsky's 5 levels of assessment. And if you look here, level 1 is participants' reaction. What do we mean by that? We mean, did the participants like the workshop? Did the participants think that they spent their time well? Did the materials make sense? Was the workshop useful? How do you know? How can you gather this kind of data? You could use participant feedback. You could have an exit survey or some observer notes during the professional learning activity. What could you use? You could use a survey. You could use, as I said, an exit ticket or other forms. The nice thing about handout 5, the handout on the levels of assessing learning outcomes within a professional learning model, is that there are specific questions that you can ask yourself and your colleagues that are planning the professional learning. And then there are samples in this handout about what some of those outcome measures might look like. So for example, if we moved on to organization support and change, for example, were there opportunities for coaches and participants to plan for and discuss practice after they tried implementing a practice that they learned in an earlier activity? When, how, and with which frequency or what frequency did coaches support the professional practice that you hope to enact? In other words, is there more problem solving happening in these middle school classrooms? Is the coach helping to support those teachers to enact that practice? There are different ways of gathering that data. It could come from the coaching logs if the coaches were involved with them, and so on. So you will take a few moments at the end of this recording and this opportunity to actually look at some samples of those types of measures. Example, mathematics coaching log, and so on. So in closing, in order to have successful and effective professional learning, we need to bring all of these pieces together. This was brought to you by REL Appalachia. And if you want to know more about the partnership itself, some of the different tools and resources that were developed across the 4.5 years of the partnership, you could go to this website, You could also use the tiny URL. The nice thing about the recording is you could stop and copy this down, type it into your browser, and go directly there to get additional tools and supports, as well as learn more about the other research and practice engagements, coaching, and so on that REL Appalachia engages in. Feel free to contact us, reach out for questions. If you have things that you want more detail about, don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you very much for attending.